please silence your electronic devices so we can conduct our business, and stand for the invocation.
Right.
Lord, gathered today, intent on doing good work, seek to represent fairly those who've given us this task. May our efforts be blessed with insight, guided by understanding and wisdom. We seek to serve with respect for all, and may our faith give us strength to act honestly and fair in all matters before us. Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comments? All speakers should have signed up in advance with the city clerk. Each speaker will please use the podium in front of, right there in front of council. Please state your name and address before beginning your statement. You'll be limited to 5 minutes. Please address your comments to the chair. Council will not engage in debate with the speaker. On your first bell, that means you have 30 seconds left. Please wrap it up because on your second bell, I'll have to stop you right there.
Oh, John Roach, sorry.
John Roach, 116 Grandview Terrace. Today is regular garbage pickup day on my street. It used to be Wednesday, they moved it to Monday. Today I had a chance to ask the driver why the change, and he said, well, the city made us do it. We're talking waste management. Later in the day I was talking to somebody, mentioned that, and they go, oh, we had a phone message. Their service was changed, I think, from Friday to another day, and they said, this is required by the city of Batavia. I'd like to know, whose idea was it to mandate, require, tell? You know, it doesn't sound like it was a conversation where everybody agreed. The driver I talked to said this has really screwed up his route and everything else because he had a route on Wednesday that went further down on Clinton Street. Did city council direct anybody to do this? Did city council take a vote? I'd like to know what they mean by we were required or made to do it, because nobody seems to know a whole lot about it. Thank you.
Council response to public comments?
It just amazes me that the public has, since we've privatized the garbage pickup, that the public has been complaining about having trash on the streets every day of the week. And we react to that and instruct our city manager to put together some kind of a conference with the garbage haulers that are involved in the city to try to work out a schedule where we don't have garbage pickup every day on every street. And now we have a complaint that we've done just that. So I'm not quite sure what direction our people want us to head in then, because that's exactly what Mr. Moore or Dr. Moore did, is he put together a conference with all the garbage haulers, and I'll let him address that and let the public know exactly what is going on.
Yeah, I think we discussed this at a public meeting.
Yeah.
And then instead of making an ordinance or trying to force it, we tried to just come to an agreement where it was kind of a self-regulated thing, and Marty, maybe you can continue on with that.
Yeah, there's not a, it doesn't work.
Just use your outside voice. That'll
All
work.
right, I'll use my sportscaster's voice from, yes. So basically what's happening is we were approached, there were concerns about the drivers, you know, these garbage companies showing, several of the streets in the city, they were showing up as many as 4 and 5 days a week. So I got with the Public Works Director and we sat down and took a look at, well, what kind of schedules would help to be able to reduce that? Can we get it all the way down to 1 day a week? Well, we looked at the way, because we have 4 different haulers, and it was basically, no, we could get it down to a couple of days, 2 days a week. And so we talked about, we said, do we bring an ordinance back in front of city council, or do we talk to the garbage companies and ask them to try and come to an accommodation? Well, three of the major ones have stepped forward and said, yes, they will work to accommodate. It's based on the way the rotation, as I understand it, Matt can correct me, is that it's based on when ARC used to, before it was privatized, when ARC used to come in, they had certain types of schedules, and they based it on that type of a rotation of schedule. But since we're dealing with 4 companies, it's trying to make sure that the companies aren't getting in each other's way, yet still reducing the number of days per week that they're able to come in. Waste Management said they were going to go ahead and take care of it, handle it, with their customers and with their routes, and that they would implement in September, and apparently, based on what I just heard, that happened. Hopefully, the other companies are going to, ARC and those will be contacting customers. If not, we'll make sure we field whatever questions, complaints, concerns, and all of those. But that is our goal, is to have that reduced level of schedule down to a couple of days a week. We have one company that we've sent the information to. They have not come in and met with us, but we're still pressing them for a meeting, and we're hopeful that they'll come along with it too. They don't have as many customers, but still, I mean, the closer we get to to a uniform 1 or 2 days a week at most on each street, the better off we're going to be, I think. As far as particularly when they're coming early in the morning, it is a little bit concerning to us that they didn't contact their customers, but I'm certain that we'll follow through with them on that and deal with that concern as well. So we'll make sure we follow through with the companies and see what's going on.
Well, the other thing too is, the company may know what's going on, but the people actually collecting the trash might not know that its decision has been made. And so you're talking to somebody, who doesn't know what was decided, and then he puts his own twist on it. And then there are those that, when the garbage was picked up every day, they had a nice thing to complain about, and now that the garbage is not picked up every day, this gives them another nice thing to complain about. So at this point, the complaining will continue, and we'll just do the best we can, I guess.
We're just going to continue, though, to try to help keep the number of times per week on these streets down.
And that makes sense. I mean, nobody wants to stop them from picking up the trash, but I mean, if you're hearing every day the garbage truck from a different company is picking up trash, and trash is always out on your street, that could bother some people, I would think.
I know that, for example, ours came on the same day on our street, but normally they pick up at around 11:30, and they had picked it up before right when I was getting up to get ready to go to work this morning. So schedule changed on my street as well.
Okay. I mean, we'll see how it works out, and if we have to,
we'll keep an eye on it.
I'd rather not have to make an ordinance if we don't have to, and let them just kind of manage themselves. Would make more sense, I think, give them more freedom to do what they need to do and run their own business. Okay. Bob, we have communications, but we have none, but you wanted to have Matt come up
Yeah,
and explain?
thank you, Mr. President. We just finished, we're 99% complete with the water line street project on Union Street, and I'd like Matt to say a few words. He's overseen this whole project. He really wanted to retire, and he wasn't given a choice, so thanks, Matt.
Yeah, Councilperson Jankowski asked me to talk just a little bit about the water line project this year. The project, at least in my opinion, I think most people, was quite successful. It included some drainage improvements on Williams Park that were needed, which should help specifically some standing water we had on the very back side of that, closer to Genesee Lumber, and as well as making the park a little bit more usable. It should drain a little quicker and be drier. In addition, there was new water main down Brooklyn Avenue. It also included a mill and resurface of Brooklyn Avenue and new sidewalks on both sides of the street. Down South Main from Brooklyn to the traffic circle, the roundabout, if you will, brand new water main. That replaced an old, in Brooklyn Avenue as well. Those were 4-inch water mains, which in today's day are severely undersized for fire protection. As far as a water purveyor, we're happy with it, but the fire department, they like those great big water mains. So those were all replaced with 8-inch water main, which is the standard water main size nowadays to provide the appropriate fire protection going along. Then on Union Street water main has been problematic as long as I've worked for the city, and you know, we've talked about it in-house, so we lose track of how many water main breaks there's been on Union Street in the last 25 to 30 years. So that line was replaced in its entirety from Main Street all the way to Oak Street. And wherever the new water main ends up under the sidewalk. There's a few reasons for that. One is you have to keep the old water main in place and active while you're installing the new one, and there's usually just not room to stick it in the street where the sanitary sewer, the storm sewer, and the existing water main already are. So the sidewalk ends up being a preferred spot to place the water main, and then you're running your services off that. And then when you're done, the added benefit, there's usually a brand new sidewalk that's all ADA compliant and everything else that goes along with the project. So the project was completed. We had a very good contractor, Ransco Pipeline. We're very pleased with them. They ran a pretty clean operation. We didn't receive a whole lot of complaints as far as their housekeeping. The few issues that residents had, they were very responsive to. I think there was a couple of minor claims, and again, they responded to the people and tried to make things right, and I think that has been pretty successful. The last thing, couple things I'd like to mention. In total, there was 132 water line connections that had to be made as part of this, as far as each individual residence. And keep in mind, they're connecting to an old, usually galvanized water line that may be 70, 80 years old. They were able to successfully connect 130 out of 132. So two people, you know, and unfortunately it's an expense, had to replace their private water service, but the contractor was very careful, very thoughtful in trying to make sure that the people were served in a positive manner that way. And I guess last couple items. One, that the project is essentially wrapped up and it is going to be completed under budget, which is always a positive thing. And our consulting engineers, GHD, they had an inspector on site that did just a fantastic job for us, looked out for the city's best interest to make sure that we got what we paid for. So all in all, like I said, this was the people that lived there had a long summer. It was dusty, it was dirty, it was noisy, but it's behind them now. We've had really good weather to establish the lawns. The grass has grown up in most of those spots. So all in all, it was a pretty positive project.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
The next business meeting will be held Tuesday, October 15, 2019, at 7 p.m. at City Hall Council Boardroom, second floor, City Center. Make note that's a Tuesday. We also have a Fire Prevention Week proclamation. Councilman Jankowski will read that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Chief, want to come up here and bring them with you? This is a proclamation recognizing the city of Batavia Fire Prevention Week. It has like probably 30 whereases, so I'll copy the whereases. The city of Batavia is committed to ensuring the safety and security of all those living in and visiting Batavia. Fire is a serious public safety concern, both locally and nationally, in homes and locations where people are at greatest risk of fire. Home fires killed 2,630 people in the United States in 2017, according to the National Fire Protection Association. And fire departments in the United States responded to 357,000 home fires. The majority of U.S. fire deaths, 4 out of 5, occurred home each year. And the fire death rate per 1,000 home fires reported to U.S. fire departments was 4% higher in 2017 than in 1980. When the smoke alarm sounds, Batavia residents may have less than 2 minutes to escape to safety. Batavia residents who have planned to practice a home fire escape plan are more prepared and will therefore be more likely to survive the fire. And Batavia residents should make a home escape plan drawing a map of each level of the home, showing all doors and windows. And residents should practice a home fire escape plan with everyone in the household, including visitors. And Batavia residents should practice a home fire escape drill at least twice a year during the day and at night. And residents should teach children to escape on their own in case adults cannot help them. Residents should make sure everyone in the home knows how to call 911 or the local emergency number from a cell phone or a neighbor's phone. Residents should practice using different ways out, and residents in a real emergency should get low and go under the smoke to get out quickly. Residents should get out and stay out, never going back inside the home for people, pets, or things. And residents are responsive to public education measures and are able to take action to increase their safety from fire, especially in their homes. The 2019 Fire Prevention Week theme, "Not every hero wears a cape. Plan and practice your escape," effectively serves to remind us that we need to take personal steps to increase our safety from fire. Therefore, Eugene Jankowski Jr., City Council President of the City of Batavia, do hereby proclaim October 6 through 12, 2019 as Fire Prevention Week throughout this city, and I urge all the people of Batavia to be aware of their surroundings. Look for available ways out in the event of a fire or other emergency. Respond when the smoke alarm sounds by exiting the building immediately, and to support the many public safety activities and efforts of the City of Batavia Fire Department during Fire Prevention Week 2019. Men and ladies, I'd just like to say one thing. I mean, the past few weeks, you've really earned your salaries, and you are the heroes of the community. You guys do a stellar job, and all of us on council appreciate it, so thank you.
Chief, do you have anything to add today?
Just to reiterate what Councilperson Jankowski said, I'm extremely fortunate that I have an amazing staff to work with. Not only is it them, but we partner with a lot of other agencies. Our water department there, we may be good firefighters, but we can't be good firefighters unless we have a good water supply. So we thank the water department for everything they do for us. We thank the police department that they protect us by keeping the traffic at bay, dealing with, could be irate or panicked homeowners, neighbors. They partner with us on that aspect. And then after the fire, the building codes department that help us to ensure that, you know, the house is deemed habitable, inhabitable. So it's a partnership, but I'm very blessed that I have an amazing group of people. It's not just a job for them, it's a passion, and they do it very well. And we thank you for acknowledging them, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now have the audit report 2018-2019 by Laura Landers, Freed Magic. I need to lower this.
Yeah, that's what we have.
Okay, thank you, Council President. And as you stated, this is our report on our audit of the City of Batavia for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2019. And just to let you know that we have met with the Audit Committee on August 20th of 2019. and had probably about a 2-hour meeting to review these financial statements in depth. So this is, as it has been in the past, a high-level summary to provide to the council, and you've all been provided copies of the financial statements and management report. So in summary, as far as the audit for this year, we conducted our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. Also, this year included a single audit that was required because the city did expend in excess of $750,000 of federal funds. So that was an additional compliance audit on top of the normal audit that we would conduct for the city. During the year, the city did implement one significant standard, and that was Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 75. And we've talked about that in the past, and that's an update from the Statement Number 45, which relates to the other post-employment benefit liability. The most significant impact of this standard is that prior to 75, 45 required that liability to be amortized over a 30-year period. 75 did away with that amortization and said whatever the liability is based on your actuarial valuation at this point, which is 3/31/19, that entire liability will come onto the financial statements. The impact, the majority of the impact was really related to the general fund and in the government-wide statements. Did not impact the general fund balance. And what it required was a restatement of the net position. For the governmental activities, the net position was decreased by a little over $2,800,000. There also was an impact on the water and sewer funds, but that was very negligible. So the biggest impact is really on the government-wide financial statements, bringing that entire liability onto those financial statements. Again, no impact on the general fund, though, as far as the operations. So for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2019, it resulted in revenues of a little over $17 million, and that includes other financing sources, usually interfund transfers in from closeout of capital projects, and expenditures of $16,294,000. Which includes other financing uses. Now, something that's a little bit different if you look through the financial statements, the city is now recording their health insurance in their self-insurance fund. So instead of the health insurance being recorded in the general fund, there is a transfer out of the general fund, out of the water fund, and out of the sewer fund into the self-insurance fund, and all claims for health insurance are being paid out of that self-insurance fund. That's one of the funds that's being reported in the financial statements, so you can see what the claims were or expenditures and what the transfers in were from the operating funds of the city. Overall, the general fund ended the year with an excess of revenues over expenditures of a little over $1.1 million. This increased the fund balance in the general fund to a little bit over $8.5 million. So you can see this is a chart from the last 10 years. So the $1.1 million is 2019. And for the most part, except for there's 2 years in there that we had a loss from the operations. But in both of those years, those were planned losses. The council planned to use fund balance for particular expenditures, one-time expenditures, and that's what created those particular losses. The city ended the year with an unassigned fund balance of a little over $1.9 million. Now, the unassigned fund balance is that portion that the council could choose to use for whatever purpose they would like to use it for. Actual revenues exceeded the budgeted revenues by a little over $646,000, which on a $16 million budget is pretty close budgeting. Major reasons for this variance is related to that actually sales tax came in about $375,000 higher than it was in the prior year, and also that was higher than what the budgeted amount was. And the city has really taken a stance as far as sales tax, because it is an economically dependent revenue, is to be conservative in their budgeting of sales tax. And as we all know, that our sales tax here in Genesee County, a lot of that is driven by gasoline sales. So, and also that the city did receive some federal and state sources, received a FEMA grant for the fire department, and also additional arterial aid came to the city from the state. Other state aid along with VLT allocations have stayed flat for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2019. As I said, management continues to use that conservative approach to the budgeting. And really, when we look at on the expenditure side of the budget, the city actually expended less than what was budgeted. However, when you look at it again, the actual revenues were about 92% of what was budgeted. So again, on a $16 million budget, that's fairly close to have an 8% gap there. The next slide just shows the actual revenues and expenditures throughout that 10-year period. Revenues exceeded expenditures, resulting in a elimination of that deficit fund balance that had occurred in 2006. During the current year, the city utilized reserves to fund equipment purchases, sidewalk improvements, and information technology improvements in the amount of about $678,000. Current year saw several expenditure categories under budget, including public safety, transportation, and cultural recreation. And as I said, overall, actual expenditures came in at about 92% of what was budgeted. The city has continued to fund various reserves in an effort to stabilize tax rates, provide for replacement of the equipment and infrastructure, thereby reducing reliance on issuing debt, and provide for payment of future liabilities. This is the categories of the fund balance for the general fund for the year ending, and I have the detail of the restricted balances. These are amounts that are set aside as reserves, and the amount for insurance reserves at these are all at 3/31/19. It was a little over $745,000. For capital projects was about $3.4 million. The employee benefits accrued liability is down to a little over $5,000, and I think that's one of the things that we discussed in the audit committee meeting, that there will be some retirements coming up, and that that reserve is planned to be funded in the future. Restricted for retirement contributions, this is for to stabilize if there are fluctuations, significant fluctuations in the retirement system contributions, and that amounts about $330,000. And restricted for Dwyer Stadium repairs is about $115,000. The city also has committed fund balances. These are fund balances that you as the council have said we have committed for these various purposes, and at any point in time you can uncommit those funds. And that total amount was about $330,000, and that includes master plan, habitat, architect plans, Ellicott Trail Project, and the Creek Park. Signed for encumbrances at the end of the year was about $67,000. These are amounts that have been, committed by the city through purchase orders and will be received and paid for in the current year. Assigned for funding of reserves is $1.3 million. This is in accordance with Dr. Moore's recommendations to the Audit Advisory Committee, and also to looking at the city's overall fund balance policy, and also, like I said, funding some of those reserves that the city will be using in the near future. Assigned for subsequent year's budget was about $276,000. That's the amount that you utilize to balance your 1920 budget. And the unassigned, as I said, is the $1.9 million. So overall, general fund, this is the balance sheet for the general fund showing the assets and the liabilities. And again, the fund balance is down below. Again, it ended the year with an excess of revenues over expenditures of a little over $1.1 million. The city continues with a fiscally conservative budgeting approach. It also shows that the city is in a good cash position. You have a little over $11 million in assets compared to $2.5 million in liabilities. So certainly enough cash to cover any of those liabilities. And again, good reserves, some funding that's going to happen with some of those reserves in the current year. Next one is the water fund. And the water fund generated an operating surplus again in the current year. This is an indication that current rates continue to be at levels which have supported the operations. The water fund ended the current year with an operating surplus of a little over $1 million before non-operating revenues and expenses and operating subsidy that is paid to the general fund, and that's on an annual basis, and the total of those were $446,000. Net cash position of the water fund increased about $740,000, resulting in cash at the end of the year of about $3.4 million net of cash that's restricted for capital projects in the water fund. And again, healthy net position for the water fund, significant amount of assets in the water fund when you look at it compared to the liabilities in the water fund. Next is the sewer fund. Sewer fund ended the current year with an operating surplus in a little over $200,000 before non-operating revenue expenses and operating subsidy to the general fund about $275,000. Net cash position in the sewer fund increased about $660,000, and the cash balance at the end of the year for the sewer fund was a little over $5.7 million net of cash restricted for capital projects. And again, when you look at the assets, even if you look at the liquid assets and not the capital assets, liquid assets are still, still in line with what the liabilities are, and you have long-term liabilities, you have debt service that's included in those long-term liabilities that will be paid out over the next several years. So again, the sewer fund is in a very good financial position. The last piece is the management report. This is our report to City Council, and just want to note that as a result of our audit, we did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the operations of the city. We did note there is a couple of recommendations within this report. One of them is to have an actuarial evaluation for the workers' comp that we've left it on there for the last couple years, but as I was telling the council president, it's the city just became self-insured for workers' comp a few years ago, so it's hard to get actuarial history data to be able to form a good actuarial evaluation of that information And we feel that it's probably about time city can look at that, and, your HR director has been informed of that, so that was just one of our recommendations. And the other recommendation is regarding some reconciliations of receivables in the city clerk's office. So, again, neither one of them considered material weaknesses or a significant deficiency.
Yeah, Laura, I'm wondering, the water and the sewer fund, we transferred money to what account?
There's transfers, there's annually budgeted transfers that come from the water and sewer to the general fund to cover administrative type expenditures.
My question would be, and George, maybe you can answer this, I thought that money could only be for infrastructure, to transfer anything, water, sewer, whatever, into neighborhoods, new lines.
Well, I think they're basically, for administrative services, the water department is compensating the city back.
For services that, right.
Services rendered by the city administrative.
Okay.
Yeah, well, like for the city, because Marty's salary is not charged to the water fund or the sewer fund. So there is an amount each year that's coming from the water and the sewer to compensate the general fund for part of their salary, part of Lisa's salary, part of, the administrative salaries that are not charged directly to the water fund. But they're obviously doing work related to the water fund, right?
Because that's.
Yeah.
On that, because I remember when this came in, and it was supposed to be used for, infrastructure or what
This
have
is,
you,
this
but
is, this is
it's just going
allowed,
into it.
this is an allowed best practice procedure, as I understand it.
Right.
For them to do work for the water and to do various type of things, and then we get compensated for that work from.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, that is what that is.
Any other questions or concerns? And how did the city respond to those recommendations? You said you had two minor.
Yes.
Thought you'd like to-
And,
how did they respond?
yeah, and Dawn Fairbanks is aware of that, and I think has asked us for some names of some actuarial firms that do deal specifically with workers' comp. So I think she's going out to, either do an RFQ possibly or an RFP related to that. And I think Heidi has already begun work related to those reconciliations and, is going to be able to provide us with those details, for the 3/31/20 audit.
So you're satisfied with
Yes, yes, I am.
response for those?
I am. Thank you.
Laura, I had one other question. I just saw my notes here. We talked about it briefly, but I think the council might want to know the answer to that. There was a state comptroller's fiscal stress initiative, and it showed that we went from 0 to 3.3%. Is that a concern, or is that that's still well below, or?
I think that's well below, and I think Lisa was talking about that, I think it has been 0 in the past, and I think it's a valid question for Lisa to contact them and ask them, because I'm not sure what all goes into their formulas.
That's what I thought. What did we do differently, or what can we do differently to keep that at 0 is our
Right.
goal, I would think.
Yeah, and I wouldn't think that 3.3, I've seen others that are much higher than that.
Said the goal was maintaining it below 44.9%.
Right.
So 45% and 3.3 is a big gap.
It is a big gap.
But again,
Yes.
is this a warning sign? And I don't want it to start creeping up and then one day we realize.
Well, and I think what it is that you do have to inquire of the state comptroller's office and ask them what was included. I'm sure that they're taking information from your annual update document that's being sent in to them, and they're comparing it across the board to other cities, and looking at where the city falls as far as other cities in comparison, but also looking at what there's those factors that are going into that. And I don't see anything that really kind of has really changed from the prior year, other.
Possible it's a couple years leading up to this.
Yeah,
they're behind on it
and
because
that's
we
what
did
I'm
have some
wondering.
Stress there when we had sales tax revenue was a little down.
Right.
We had some concerns there in our budget.
And you did have that deficit that was back in 2017, I believe.
Planned.
But it was a planned deficit.
Right.
So if they're taking that into consideration and they're talking about that, their data is lagging, because I know like their data where if you look out on their website, you can look at, you could look at how all the cities across the state, and they have that information all accumulated, but it's for the prior year, it's for 2017. So it's really going back for you, it would be going back a year and 3 months. So if some of that information, and I'm like I'm saying, I don't know how they derived that 3.3%, unless it is from
It's worth looking
those
into.
prior
anyway.
deficit,
I'm
yeah.
just concerned because it is a jump from 0 to that. And I do remember, I think the one year, I think we purchased a fire truck, and I think that's where that $1 million expense came from, was that purchase that year from reserve, so we didn't have to bond that, which was actually a good thing, but it looks like a deficit, but it was planned.
Right, but it was planned, exactly.
We had saved the money properly to do that,
Yes.
so that's why you want to do that instead of bonding everything.
Well, and if Lisa wants to, contact them, I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, if you have
Yeah.
some time, I'd like to know, not an urgent thing, but if you get a moment, just because I'm curious to know what we can do to possibly keep that in mind so we can maybe strive for that 0.
Yes.
Calculation that looked at us that shows us exactly, it's different analysis of different pieces of our statements. It is based on 33118, which Laura said. And then based on these different ratios and such, whatever the calculation ends up being, if it's below this or under this, then you get,
Right, right.
Sure, and if it's based on,
find a point, and then that point, those points add up to whatever your fiscal monitoring score is. So the higher the score, the more along you should be. We have always been 0 since the state instilled the stress monitoring. It's been probably for 4 years now, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, just,
that's what I got for you, and I can give you those.
yeah. That's good. It's just something that changed, and I just want to make sure.
well, and to follow up with what Lisa just said, if they're looking at 33118, President, 2017 was the year that you had the loss, that was the planned loss, and that was 1.3 million. And then you followed that with 2018 with a slight surplus of 283,000. So if they're looking at those 2 years together, they're saying, wait a minute, here's this fairly large deficit, then only a very small surplus in the following year. So if they're looking at that based on the historical data, which they have to, because obviously they don't have 33119, that may be part of the reason for
So we
that.
might end up just by continuing on the path back down to 0 in a year.
Right, because this year you ended up with a surplus of 1.1.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay,
So,
okay. Any other questions or concerns? Sorry, I just saw that at the last
Yep.
minute. Thank you very much.
no, thank you.
The first item is the transferring funds from assigned fund balance to various reserve funds. Marty?
I had the privilege of being in the first audit committee meeting, for me at least. And we appreciated those. One of our council members was there, and it was clear that the committee was dedicated to the work that they were doing and taking a look at where we were at with the funds. We were pleased to see that there was $1.3 million to be able to commit to reserves and still see a slight increase, about a percentage point or so increase in our unassigned fund balance on top of that. So what we did is we actually had a couple of expenses, and I'll walk you through them. And as you see, a couple of them will explain them because we have some business type expenses here, and then we've also got some expenses driven toward our priorities. The first one was on the police equipment reserve. Typically in a year, I was looking at about somewhere around 10 to 20. We recommended 20,000 this year. And you'll notice in the notes there that in previous years, it would say that it was toward the purchase of police vehicles. However, in discussion with the auditors, because it's a regular program of replacement, it's identified now as an operations and maintenance type of expense. So looking at the reserves, we looked at what is going on with the police and their needs. The police department, and I'm sure Sean will probably love to announce it, had gotten on a waiting list, and it's gotten an announcement that they're going to be able to pick up an armored vehicle to replace the unarmored vehicle our emergency response team uses right now for a very good price. And because of that, obviously there are going to be some expenses. So I recommended to the audit committee that there be some reserve put there to help deal with some expenses related to that, if that happens to be needed. If it doesn't happen to be needed in future years, we may look at doing something else, because certainly the police have a lot of needs. But want to make sure you understood that one. Fire equipment reserve, this one is going toward a continual contribution to the fire fund for replacement. They have a couple of fire equipment apparatus that are continuing to give us challenges, and the more we can continue to consistently put money in there, every literally dollar we put there is a dollar less we have to try and go out and borrow. So now the Department of Public Works Equipment Reserve, some of the money that came back to the city, and a little bit of a surprise, was a calculation, I believe it was by the state, of a little over $220,000 that actually said that they had shorted us on payment. And it was a request from Department of Public Works, and I said, well, if it's possible, we recommend to the audit committee, and we did, that they go ahead and include $220,000 in that reserve. Now, one of the things that they're going to be doing over there, we always want to have balances in the reserve after expenses, and they're looking at trying to get a new snowplow, basically, to get a new truck and all the blade and equipment that needs to go on it. They want to cycle one of the old ones out, get one of these newer ones in, and it's about $306,000 for that expense. So that's why we're recommending this, because there was an existing balance already in there of $194,000, and this will leave them a little bit over $100,000 left in the reserve after the expense for the snowplow equipment. The next one we have is the facilities reserve. As you know, because of some needs to deal with code issues, the City Council in the last budget year agreed to $1.1 million out of that facility reserve to be going toward repairs over at the fire station and over at the Bureau of Maintenance. And it was going back to the city's commitment to wanting to do something with the police station. And so I felt it was prudent that we try to get money back into this facility reserve, because part of the plan in dealing with the replacement of a police station is there are a number of steps. You have your planning, and you have your pre-design and your design, and then you've got other expenses there, and then you lead up to your construction. Well, the closer, obviously, again, the more money we've got in here to cover ourselves out of pocket, the less money we have to bond. So we were recommending $175,000 actually going to this particular reserve. One of the other things too I would note with that, there are current problems in the existing police station in the infrastructure. Matt Worth, the Public Works Director, is working with GHD Construction, and they are coming back with some recommendations. And it's preliminary right now, but preliminarily, we're thinking that we'll be able to deal with the existing building and be able to hang on for another 5 years. But we won't know that for sure until we get the final report back from the engineers. The sidewalk
Go
reserve.
ahead, wait, you got a question? Go ahead.
Since your question, we're looking at hanging on to that police station and have the police in there for another 5 years.
What we're doing is we're planning for worst-case scenario. We always plan for worst-case scenario, we hope for the best, and we're planning for the best on one side, and then the other side, we're always planning, well, if we have to stay here another 3 years, we gotta make sure the building's operational. Plus the fact that when we're done with the building, we will definitely be coming to you with a plan on what we're going to do with the building once the police move out.
Okay, I just had to ask because it's,
Right.
I think I'm being nice.
Well, I
when
mean,
say
we got,
thank
you're gonna have, it's gonna be time to design and build and
Yes.
bond and all that. We have to
Fix
wait
it
for our,
now till we get to
we have to wait for our balance, our debt balance to kind of,
Okay.
be paid off so we can afford it. So
Yes.
that's gonna take some time, and I think 5 years is.
Yeah, I just wanted to, just wanted to
We're
clarify.
covering our base,
Yeah.
we're covering our bases as we
In the
move.
meantime, we'll just fix it
Transition
and
over
go
to
on.
it.
I'm fine
Make
with
it
that.
usable.
No, I'm fine with
So
that.
that's, I mean, good question, though.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
just
that makes
wanted to
sense.
ask a question.
Good question.
Calm down. Okay, there you go.
Okay, the sidewalk reserve, last year, we put 25,000 in the sidewalk reserve because there was a pretty significant amount this year that went toward it. It helped. We did approximately 24,000 linear feet of sidewalk this last year. A big chunk of the reserve was chewed up as a result, part of it, matching with grants plus doing some other work. So we recommended 50,000 instead of 25,000 to the sidewalk reserve for this next year. And if there's other grants or things that come along that can help with that. If not, then we've got some critical needs stretches of sidewalk. We still have money to be able to deal with them. So the next one, compensated absences reserve. This, I believe, was referenced by Laura in her presentation. We have, I don't want to get the number wrong here. We are projecting to spend up to $306,000 out of that reserve to cover retirement-related expenses. We have a number of individuals that are reaching or have reached their 30 or 30-plus year marks and are deciding to enjoy their remaining years. As a result, there's an expense that goes with that. Cities go through cycles, and one of the cycles you go through is you get a batch of young talent, and the city in that period, about 30 to 35 years ago, was very fortunate to get a number of individuals to hang on that long and stay. Well, now those individuals are saying it's time for us to retire. Because the original balance in there was actually $18,567, which was much, that's almost $300,000 lower than we needed. And we need some money in there in case we've got some future ones in the next 1 or 2 years out. So the recommendation was $400,000 into this reserve. This is literally taking care of a business expense for the city. If we did not do this, it would have a major hit to the general fund in next year's budget. So, parking lot reserve, $100,000. We didn't do any, or we did a little bit here and there, but nothing really serious on parking lots this year. But there are plans in talking with the Public Works Department to do some parking lot improvements this next year. And so we felt it prudent to have some money put into that parking lot reserve. And then finally, the administrative reserve. In our assessments that's ongoing, and again, we express appreciation to the county's IT department for helping us with assessments. We have some additional equipment. The city's telephone systems are reaching end of life. Our computer network distribution system, which is basically a radio type system that sends the network capability to our outbuildings in the city, is reaching end of life, meaning they're all out of warranty. It's becoming harder and harder to, to get replacement parts and those types of things, and it's being strongly recommended we look at those. And they are analyzing them. They're not going to recommend something that's just replace it just for the sake of replacement, but it's all part of what we talked about before. Is the city didn't have in place a capital replacement plan for its IT infrastructure. In other words, we didn't have a plan for trying to gradually work these things in, so now we're having to take care of them. And one of the recommendations that's going to be coming out of the assessment is how do we include this in the plan for our future year's budgeting so that we don't run into this situation again. The administrative reserve amount was about $300,000. The other thing I did want to say to this is that we are working hard, and I give credit to the assistant city manager because she has taken responsibility for helping with the computer system and the computer conversion. And is doing a good job on working with procurement to make sure we're getting our best price, best quality. So to the degree that we're able to save money and not have to spend this, we can also use this money to help pay down on our short-term bond note, to help that get paid off more quickly. So that's the outlay of the reserve recommendations. We ran it by the audit committee. They felt good about it. I did want to make a note for you that we did include in the budget for this year an increase, although it was a modest one. We did include an increase for the workers' compensation reserve. At budget time, we will be looking at it again in this next year's budget because we've got to continue building that reserve. We right now have a stop-loss insurance that at the time that we were doing the budget thought we could get it at $500,000 deductible. It turned out to be $700,000 or $750,000 because the change in cost just literally over a 6-month period. But we have that stop-loss to cover us from a catastrophic event. Our goal is at some point to get ourselves to $1 million plus in the workers' comp reserve and then pool that deductible, see if we can raise it up and lower our costs of the insurance a little bit more, which allows us to put even more in reserve. So our idea is cover ourselves, yet still get money into that reserve. So I wanted to make sure you knew that that was okay. The other thing too is we do have a healthy balance in our health insurance reserve, and we are watching and monitoring it. Any issues or concerns that come up, of course, we would share them with council, but it's looking very good right now. That's it.
Anyone have any questions? Okay. The FEMA grant for the fire department. So, wait a minute, I probably got ahead of myself. So are we all in consensus to move that resolution, which is the one for the transferring of the balance, to the business meeting?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, that moves forward. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Good evening, Council President, members of council. The FEMA grant is the Assistance to Firefighter Grant. We were very fortunate a year and a half ago to receive almost $250,000 that we applied for, and we purchased self-contained breathing apparatus. And we submitted another grant. It wasn't in the size that we were hoping, but it was an additional just under $6,000. And we allocated that money originally to buy a new extractor, which we use to extract the hydrocarbons from the turnout gear that we wear. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough money for an extractor. I'll be coming to you guys next year with some more of that, but that's just a little prelude. However, we were able to reassign the funds to purchase wireless headsets for the lead engine. These headsets will allow for communication among the firefighters and the officer, as well as through the dispatch center. It'll allow pass-through communication, it'll reduce radio traffic, plus it'll cut down on the ambient noise within the cab. Inside the cab of a fire truck's about 100 decibels, so it's pretty loud and it's hard to communicate. These will allow to cancel all that ambient noise and allow the guys to communicate amongst themselves. They don't have to have a lot of radio chatter. It'll allow to have a repeat button, hear the dispatch transmission, and any pertinent information. Concurrently, that'll also allow us to get off the apparatus and the guys can have the headsets on and communicate on an accident scene, so it'll improve communication. So that's what this request is.
Any questions?
Sounds great.
So we're all in consensus to move that resolution to the business meeting? Okay, that moves forward, and you have another one, the child safety seat.
We do. We were the beneficiary of the Governor's Safety Traffic Council for a grant for $3,200 for our car seat program that we have at the firehouse. It's a very successful program. This $3,200 will pay for additional training that's required every so many years of our technicians. It'll help support programs within the city, and then we purchase car seats, booster seats, that in the event that we have people that need one, we can provide one. Just in the past month, we've given away almost 16 car seats. We don't give away free car seats, but when someone comes to the fire station with a child in a seat belt and not in a car seat, we can't let them leave. So that's what we use the funds for, is to purchase car seats and whatnot.
So any questions on that? So we're in consensus to move that resolution to the business meeting? Okay, that moves forward. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Street lighting upgrades.
Good evening, City Council. Last year, a few areas were identified, specifically Central Avenue, Watson Avenue, and State Street, where there's some elevated crime areas. We're trying to find some ways to combat that. Working with the city police, some of the neighborhood cameras were installed in those areas, as well as a temporary, or the intent was for it to be a temporary increase in some of the street lighting. We're able to work with National Grid to have those lights increased. It is the police chief's recommendation that continue for an extended period of time. That being the case, the National Grid does require formal council action to maintain those elevated wattages of those street lights, those specific areas, and of course there's a cost that goes along with that. The department's in agreement that that's probably a good use in this case. However, the department does caution council that just increasing the street lighting throughout the city really can't be the end all be all. But in this specific, these three specific locations, it seems to make sense. So this authorizes National Grid to have those increased wattage street lights in those locations, and the accordingly bill for those.
And the cost to do this?
There's 4 lights that are increased from 100 watt to 400 watt lights, and that is a total impact of $700 annually for those 4 lighting upgrades.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Matt and Chief Highbush, because believe me, I've heard from residents in these areas. Like you said, it can't solve everything, but it really is a detriment. I mean, it really does discourage certain activity, and it has been a help together with the cameras. So I want to thank you, Matt and Chief Highbush. Thank you very much.
And it can be, if you overdo it, then all of a sudden it's people, they're trying to sleep at night, and nights turns into day, so as well.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Is it amber color, or is it a?
Those are sodium lights, so they do that orangish, yellowish look. This kind of does go to where we're trying to head ultimately with LED lighting and through our residential areas, and I'll be coming back to council hopefully next month with some updated numbers and figures of possibly converting all of our street lighting, or at least all the residential side street lighting, to an LED type lighting, which will be a whole nother discussion of what that cost savings is and various approaches to do that.
Are the neighbors there cooperating, like leaving a light on in the driveway or the front of the garage? Or
I guess I would defer to the police chief on that as far as cooperation from the residents in those areas.
Well, yeah, we obviously encourage people to leave their outside lights on. However, the areas that we asked for the increased lighting was specific to criminal complaints to try and discourage, obviously, the activity in the street, and assist us with our portable street cameras. So our portable street cameras are notoriously been in these areas as well. They're not an infrared camera or anything like that, so they do need some ambient light to help us out. So this definitely has improved our ability to monitor those situations as well as deter a lot.
I know there was one specific case, right, Sean, where something happened right under one of these increased street lights with the camera pointing right at it. It was very helpful.
Yeah, homicide on Central Avenue last year.
No, I just wanted to say it's also for the safety of our officers as well.
Yes,
They do
absolutely.
respond to
Yes.
something, it means
Yes.
a lot to them to have that additional.
Definitely.
And so you're saying that eventually with the LED lights, we might get more brighter light for less cost, and Because LEDs are different in that sense.
Even if the lighting level is the same, the quality of light will be better because it's not the sodium, the high-pressure sodiums, which have that orange look, which can give you color degradation, especially for the police officer. They say, was that a red car going by? Well, maybe it was brown, but that high-pressure sodium light changes that look, where the LED gives you the white, pure light that does, reflect the colors appropriate, does allow people to see better. So the quality of light is better with the LEDs.
Okay, any other questions? So we in consensus to move that forward to the business meeting?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that moves forward. The Time Warner easement,
This is an issue that's really been banging around for a couple of years. There's a few areas along Main Street where all of the utilities are required to be underground that do not have access to the high-speed cable, internet, things like that. So one of them being, the section right along here where the banks are, the old Next Level gym, the Noonan building, right in through there. There's just no access to high-speed cable or the fiber optic. So this allows an easement along the back side of those properties, along the sidewalk, for Time Warner to install their needed conduit and cabling so they can provide that service to those properties. Several of them have been looking for that for quite a long time. If this was on Main Street, they have their franchise agreements in the right-of-way, they would be able to do that, but however, this is a less costly alternative for the cable companies to install that infrastructure. Just they're not dealing with the state and also the added cost of some of the restoration. It would be on Main Street that is still significant on the backside, but not quite as bad. But this easement allows them to install the fiber optic, the high-speed data cables and things like that to support those businesses.
so as I see this diagram, it's going right along the back of those buildings along the sidewalk.
That's correct.
Between the parking lot and the building, basically.
That's exactly correct. Even though it's a little more cost, as we spoke about it within the Department of Public Works, we felt it was important not to have an easement in the middle of the parking lot because we don't want to allow future development, whatever might happen with that. And then this also removes it, the access points right up next to the building, so we don't have these little strings coming off of this line that might be through the middle as well. So you're exactly correct. It's right up tight against the buildings that they're trying to serve.
Okay.
This is going to be all underground.
Correct, underground.
Yeah, do they do the complete job?
Yes,
So there's no cost to the city, in other words, if they dig a trench and bury stuff?
that is correct.
They just need our permission to dig on our property, technically.
Yeah, the council is granting an easement to allow them to occupy that space with their cable conduit and
And
structures.
access it as they need to repair it or tie into it or whatever.
Correct.
Any other questions? Okay, so we in consensus to move that forward to the business meeting? Okay, that moves forward. Water meter funds budget adjustment.
Yes, last year when the city council did the one-year extension with the county for the water agreement, in the operation and maintenance agreement, the county was obligated to reimburse the city for its budgeted costs, but if the budget came in underneath that extra money that was available went into a fund to cover future expenses if there was overages. That account eventually reached $100,000, which was the cap on it. However, the one-year extension changed that formula where the actual reimbursement is for the city's actual cost. So it's not based on budget, it's actual cost to cover that. So part of the agreement was that that $100,000 be liquidated and turned over to the city specifically for the use of installing new water meters. So the county has kept up their end of the bargain, if you will. They've liquidated that account, sent the funds to the city. This just creates the budget lines to allow the water department to purchase those meters. We'll start getting those installed throughout the system.
Any questions? Okay, so we're in consensus to move that item to the business meeting. Okay, that moves forward. The rezone of the public storage on industrial I-1 and I-2.
Yeah, this item goes back to the beginning of the year. Mr. Yasis purchased some property on Cedar Street and wanted to create a public storage business on there. Unfortunately, our zoning document did not allow for didn't recognize public storage units or that type of a business anywhere in our zoning, so it really was, in essence, it wasn't allowed anywhere in the city, even though there were a couple of units. City Council then sent that question really to the city's planning board. The planning board went and reviewed it, defined what a public storage unit business would be and where it should be, which was identified as the industrial zones, I-1, I-2 industrial zones. That document was brought back to City Council for review. City Council reviewed it, saw no additional changes were required. That was sent to Genesee County Planning. County Planning reviewed it, was in agreement with the recommendation of the Planning Board and City Council. They sent it back recommending that those changes be implemented, and so that starts really the first step in changing the zoning ordinance, and that first step being a public hearing. So this document here sets that public hearing for November, and then we hear from the public, get their input on it, and then we will start the actual implementation of the zoning ordinance.
Any questions? Go ahead.
No questions, just that I hope that there be people here to support it, or my colleagues too, simply because the fact that it will definitely enhance that area. It's all wooded and things like that, and Guy Clark is in the process right now of building his new storage building, so that's really going to be a benefit on Cedar Street.
Maybe there'll be a public hearing.
Probably.
So this will take all I-1 and all I-2 zones and allow this for those zones, not just there, but anywhere there's an I-1 and an I-2 is what you're saying.
That is correct. So I-1, I-2 zones throughout the city, which, there's not a whole lot of them.
But there are a few, and
Yep.
that would allow those locations to be specific to that.
Yes.
And I'll put them there. if
And
that's
there's
one.
also some language as far as how far the storage units have to be from any residential abutting area. So there's some protection there as well. So somebody's not storing a large RV and having it parked right up into somebody's backyard or something like that.
Blocks
or a
their
large boat.
window or something.
Right, so, there's some buffer areas and things like that, and it seems to make sense for these to be in industrial zones.
All right, any other questions?
No, it's good.
Okay, so this was a much-needed improvement because we had no place where you would technically allow this type of structure, and it needed to be updated anyway, so.
That's
So we're
correct.
scheduling the public hearing at this point, and we're in the middle of this process.
Yeah, and I guess I would also mention that the process requires the issuance of a special use permit by the planning board. So there is some review with these types of businesses.
Someone wouldn't just be able to put one up there, they still have to get it kind of looked over.
Yes,
before they-
absolutely.
Council President, if I might also, this is, because it's a potential for a zoning change and a petition for a zoning change, it's really a 30,000 look view at it. So an independent individual project still needs to go through that review. Council itself and the PDC were just looking at it from the standpoint of, should the city change the ordinance to permit that use? So there's still 2 layers to this process that need to take place, which would,
Just changing it doesn't allow someone just to build
Right.
overnight there. I mean, they're going to still have to make application, and we're going to have to look at those plans and make sure
Right.
they're in compliance with other zones and whatnot.
And
other zoning.
there'll be a secret process as well as adopting the ordinance, which.
Right, yeah, a regular process, right. Okay, so we in consensus to schedule this public hearing?
Yes.
Okay, so that moves forward. Lease agreement with Batavia Players?
This particular issue, as you know, has been going on for a while. In fact, when I came in, I looked up when it originally came back to the council in January and February of 2018. At that time, the council approved a document that was held and not, held until, to see if the Batavia Players would agree with it. Since that time, there have been DRI project awards that had gone to the theater. Their particular grant money went through the Department of State. The Department of State has very, very particular requirements, and one of theirs is that they review literally every dotted I and every crossed T on every document that you're dealing with. And it wasn't any different in relationship to a lease agreement. So there were a couple of stipulations. One of them, they wanted to make sure there's sufficient length of time in the lease agreement in order for the project to at least have some level of return on investment. And one of the second things is for the city, it was taking a look at how are we handling things such as one of the things that was missing in the last agreement was insurance, for example. We require liability coverage now from the tenant. Another issue that was actually asked of me, and I didn't know at the time, so I did some research with our attorney, and the utilities are required to be paid for by the tenant. So they are not to be paid for by the city, by the tenant. So that's, in fact, the lease was written in that sense very similar to the one that we had when the Dan Institute was in a small piece of that space up there. The third thing that was part of that was in the previous agreement, it had mentioned an option that if Dent moved out, they could have the option to be able to consider that space that they were in. Well, Dent had moved out before this was done. They had requested we built that into the agreement so that the square footage is now larger, so that the actual dollar amount that they pay is higher in this particular agreement, even though the amount per square foot. And some of those are the same. There was one addition. The first agreement had phases. I think it was $1, $2, and $4 per square foot, phasing in over time as they were doing construction. At their request, and we took a look at it, request to go out 18 months. I assume they finally looked at and realized how long it takes to actually complete a construction project. And so we're looking at $1, $2, $3, and $4, stretching out to get $4 a square foot at the 18-month mark in the agreement. I'm not an expert, again, on what the lease amounts for square footages are, and some others here may have some historical perspective. But at least, just letting you know, as far as the Department of State is concerned, this agreement satisfies the requirement under the DRI grant that the theater group has. The theater group's planned investment is a little bit over $900,000 into the space, and that obviously, I mean, you know, that's an improvement of value of the space itself. So the city has some grant funds that we are going to be looking at for dealing with a couple of structural issues up on top of the roof and those types of things that are important for us to take care of. We don't like to be in a situation, obviously, we love for the private sector to have everything that's not government related. We have these. One of the things we're hoping for is an increase in the sellability of property by having a piece of improved space that's under lease. And we're hopeful that we can use it as a catalyst to help us along in trying to draw more business into the city of Batavia and down here into downtown. Those are pretty much the nuts and bolts. And any questions?
I have one. What's going on with, wasn't there a machine in there that needed to be removed?
There is an MRI machine in there. We looked at the draft lease. Part of the thing in the draft lease is for us to go ahead and remove it, but once it's removed, that they'll go ahead and do whatever remodeling and changing of walls and things like that they have to do after.
What's that? How are we going to do that? How are we going to?
That's a good public works.
That's still under review?
That I have asked at least 2 or 3 times, and I've been assured that a plan is being drawn up. Ultimately, it was actually brought in. We have down on one end, I think it's down on the J.C. Penney end, some doors that could actually swing out, and would probably have to go that direction to get out of there. And the other thing is you've got to find somebody willing to take the machine. So,
And is there any hazardous and something involved?
Not aware of anything hazardous in the machine.
Like big magnets or anything?
It is, you know, it's got magnets and that type of thing in it. We're not aware of any hazardous chemicals. And to the best of our knowledge, I spoke with Public Works today, we don't know of any other ownership or lien issues against that machine. So, I mean, you know, it's definitely an issue we're going to have.
We're still working on that.
Yes.
Any other questions?
I do have a question. How much of the concourse is going to be taken up? It's a beautiful building.
The concourse itself, I don't believe any additional concourse.
Well, according to this, there is, and
They're doing the facade out in front. That's not really the concourse. That's
but
sidewalk, maybe.
George, is there anything in here concerning the concourse? They were going to take some of the concourse. I thought there was.
Any major structural changes would have to be approved by the city, whether it's demise space subject to the lease, or obviously anything above and beyond that where they're looking to do something with respect to use, rent, or something beyond their existing leased space. Obviously, because this is a DRI project, there's going to be plans and build-out associated with that. That's going to be subject to code review, building department review, so there'll be eyes on that. And that's not only standard with respect to a lease of this sort as a landlord, but also because the city happens to be the entity that would be reviewing that process and those steps.
Yeah, the part I saw was all on the outside. I didn't see anything on the concourse.
Well, I did, it's right here.
Okay.
Anyways, my next question is,
Hit that again.
how come there's no security on this, any kind of security deposit in case they default or anything?
This is a nonprofit entity. Ultimately, this is also part of the DRI project. It was identified as a major redevelopment project with the city. So that's a matter of negotiation and ultimately a matter of comfort level with respect to the business terms that city management put in place. But recall that this was identified in the 2012 Community Improvement Plan, the Comprehensive Plan, as well as the DRI Plan, that downtown revitalization, redevelopment, and bringing members of the public downtown for entertainment purposes was key to the community. So it all fits together with that, along with the specific DRI funding for the project that they're going to undertake. So it's not simply a lease, I would say, from that standpoint.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a few comments. First, George, where in the lease is it identified the utilities? I couldn't find it.
It's a commercial lease. You don't identify that. It's a matter of tenant's responsibilities to pay for those utilities.
So it's a known automatic factor type thing unless otherwise discussed?
Yeah, I would identify too that the council previously reviewed this, although it's taken some time to bring it back because there were actually, considerations with respect to the DRI project, considerations with respect to the grant. Council, when it looked at this formally in February of 2018, February 12th of 2018, had similar questions that were answered in the same fashion that we're answering them now.
Well, I mean,
So
I
it's-
read it, and obviously it's been written by a lawyer because I was like, I could get through, I tried to get through it a couple times and I apologize, but it just lost me a few times. So I'm trusting your judgment.
It's a
Like
basic
Rosemary
commercial
asked,
lease. Yeah,
You're okay with this?
It's a basic commercial lease with respect to the space. There were a few modifications for this over and above prior leases that were in place with respect to that.
And you're comfortable with it?
Yes.
Bob?
Yeah, just to,
Did you read it? It was a pain in the ass.
Bob?
I hate to interrupt you, Rosemary.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just to bring up a few things. If you compute out the rent over the 5-year period, it comes out to $187,884. Now, there's no mention of the mall maintenance fees, which all the merchants here have to pay $2 a square foot. So I can only assume the city taxpayer is going to be on the hook for the mall maintenance fees, which will compute out to about $77,364 a year. So that would leave a net on the 5-year lease of $110,520. If the property was sold, it would also generate another $15,500 in property tax. Being a not-for-profit, they won't be paying that. So our net for 5 years will be $110,520.
Plus improvements to the building.
It doesn't make any difference. If somebody else, to give you an example, when Dr. Burns bought the old Brenner's Jewelry, the roof had actually caved in. He completely improved the building. He pays property tax on it, and he pays $2 a square foot. And I have a concern about the mall maintenance fees not being identified here at all, but I'm sure being a commercial lease and the city owns it, then we're stuck with it, so.
Well, bear in mind that this goes back 2 city managers ago when this process started, and there was a lot of analysis associated with not only how this fit with respect to DRI and community development, but also what the appropriate rates would be. There was discussion tonight of fiscal management. Not to laud the prior city manager too much, but he was fairly conservative when it came to fiscal matters. So I would say that the analysis on that, to the extent that that was put in place in 2017 going into 2018 when this lease was proposed, was fairly thorough along those lines. So without due respect to individual analysis of that, I'm going to defer to the business people to determine how that was calculated and what the analysis was for the best interests of the city.
My only concern is, and I'm not debating any of this, is just the fact that the taxpayers know over 5 years their contribution will be $77,000 in mall maintenance fees.
Well, no, you were taking in money, we're taking some of that money to pay the maintenance fees, and we're still coming out with a value, right? Or is there a negative value?
If we pay the $77,000, we will come out with a net revenue over 5 years of $110,520, barring the fact that we don't have to replace any heating units, AC units, or any fixtures.
And the alternative is it sits there vacant.
Or we sell it.
At
Which
fair-
we've
at-
never, wait a minute, we've never advertised it, we've
Well-
never tried selling it,
Well,
so.
again, this part of this agreement talks about them having option to purchase it at the fair market value at the time they want to buy. And they're also putting the improvements in it. So there comes a point when, it's been vacant for so long and no one has asked for anything other than the theater. And we're also looking at the economic development aspect of bringing people downtown to the theater. They're downtown, they may stay downtown and partake in some of the restaurants or other things going on. So it's all part of that downtown revitalization. And I understand your concern, and I am concerned as well, but as long as we are breaking above even, I think that for 5 years, this is a good chance to get this thing in that direction, and we could always reevaluate it. If after the lease expires and it doesn't look good, we can move in other directions, and there's also future development in the mall that might include this. So it's a contract, it's there. I'm thinking it's a good idea.
said
But,
that
I mean,
money-
I understand your concern. But
Also bear in mind too, that if I'm not mistaken, the organization itself is looking at a strong possibility of purchasing.
that's their ultimate goal, I
Right.
believe.
And
yeah.
so this is to get them in there, they're putting a lot of dollars into it to improve it. Obviously, their interest is, we want an option to buy this place, so we've got a potential buyer on the line as we're going through this process.
And potential is the key word, because you don't know how they're gonna make out, and all the investment, and they might, any business has its own ups and downs, so it's a thing.
Council President, you said there's an amount of money, and some of that is going to be taken out to pay those taxes.
And after that, we're $100,000 and some
Yeah,
thousand
we
dollars.
still are in, the black, whatever.
And not as much as
Profit.
maybe
Yes.
of taxes
No, but
collecting,
it's
but,
not.
Well, I mean, not counting the taxes, we would have a net, if we don't have to replace any equipment, if everything stays, of $110,500.
Okay.
That doesn't count the taxes, that's $2 a square foot in all maintenance fees and the,
So we got.
so I mean, I think it's up to an individual council person to decide if that's feasible or not. I think, although, I'd like to see it privately purchased someday, and on the tax rolls, at this point, this is an option.
That's what they adhere to. They want to eventually own it.
Yes.
But if they did, they wouldn't be paying tax anyway, because,
It's not a triple net lease, is it? It is? So they're gonna take care of everything anyways.
they have to.
Right,
So there you go.
But except for the roof, other than that, we would
No,
be
but
pretty
other than
much.
that, But like you said, what's the problem? Yeah.
Okay, any other, these are valid questions.
No,
This
they
is why
are.
we're here, to ask these tough questions and bring it out and talk about it. Any other questions?
well, I don't think it's triple net. If you took triple net on just the maintenance, that'd be $200,000 and some thousand dollars.
No, explain that, would you? George?
Respectfully, the tenant's responsible for maintenance, the tenant's responsible for insurance. If taxes were due, the tenant would be responsible for taxes as well. Taxes aren't going to be due on this property. I'm not going to sit here, and I wouldn't suggest it'd be good practice to sit here and try to articulate the financial analysis of this when it's already been done by city management and staff.
Right.
Respectfully, we can go through that process if that's something council would like us to do, but it's already been done by prior management, prior staff, determined and recommended to this body. This body voted 7-1 on February 12th, 2018, to move forward in that direction. Now, ultimately, the reason this was brought back is because there was a delay, because the DRI grant didn't get timely moved forward, and there were some modifications to this that in due course, city manager and I felt was appropriate to bring back to this body to identify the changes and move it forward, rather than simply saying, these changes are consistent with the document, we're going to move it forward and take that position.
No,
So
understood.
that's why it's
But,
coming
it's
back.
always good to, new things arise as well as the document change. New questions came up, and it's nice to vet it out and then have this public discussion and make sure that we're all on this, understand what's going on. So, I still don't think, I got to vote on it, but are we in consensus to move this forward to the business meeting?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Take us into executive session.
Ready. Whereas Article 7, Section 105, 1F of the Public Officers Law permits the legislative body of a municipality to enter into executive session to discuss the medical, financial, credit, or employment history of a particular person or corporation, or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of a particular person or corporation. Now therefore be it resolved by the council of the city of Batavia that upon approval of this motion, the city council does hereby enter into executive session.
Seconded by Mr. Veely. Call the roll, please.
Councilperson Casino,
Yes.
Finale,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Briggs,
Yes.
Christian,
Yes.
Raz,
Yes.
Bayakowski.
Yes.
Jankowski,
Yes.
Veely.
Okay, we now move to executive session.